the topic of epidemic is still current. So I would like to ask you how the church, how does the church handle with this situation? How does the church support the poor people or people in need, that some ill people, maybe some concrete, with some concrete gestures or yeah.
Yes, so the Vatican and Pope Francis in particular has been very active in trying to help all the people who are suffering at this time from COVID-19 and its effects worldwide. In fact, Pope Francis had instituted early on a commission specifically for COVID-19 housed within the Vatican's dicastery for promoting integral human development, which has been studying what is needed around the world at this time and even looking at the aftermath. And that is run by Cardinal Turkson. Pope Francis has sent respirators through to parts of northern Italy that were very much in need. For instance, Bergamo, we know so many people have died. Italy has really suffered with more than 35,000 people dying from the virus, but the entire world is affected, and through various gestures, also through Caritas, there have been respirators, masks, help toward families who cannot support themselves now that they are out of work or need to stay home. The Vatican also has had a summer program for the children of their employees, but everything's changed here because the important thing is also implementing the safety measures necessary without compromising the Catholic faith. So still being able to go to Mass and receive the sacraments, but in a safe way where there is more social distancing, there is antibacterial sanitizer, where there are other measures in place. So these are some of the main gestures as far as the Vatican is concerned.
So we can see also that we experienced this, that in the church there were some also, because of some restrictions, the church was also limited, and even in Italy this Holy Mass was suspended. In Poland it was different, but however there were also limitations. How does this period influence the faith of the Catholics, and do you think that people are already ready to come back to the church? Are they coming back? Or maybe
yes,
there is the attitude to pray at home still?
Yes, for the most part, Italy had followed the model of other European countries, but as you had said, Poland and I believe also Latvia had different, continued with masses in a safe way, which was very admirable. Italy had taken very much the extremely prudent approach, which caused a lot of debate, because if certain other services could be open during that time, then some argued, why can't going into a church be among the essential services that people are allowed to do? Because technically, during phase one, going into a church was not considered essential and therefore illegal. Hence, this caused many discussions. Pope Francis had done a great deal to be present spiritually for people around the world, and at that point it was the most acute phase of the virus in Italy, so he had streamed his morning masses from his residence Casa Santa Marta on a daily basis, and specifically made his intentions those who are suffering from the virus in various ways. He did various video messages. As far as the bishops' conference, they had a weekly rosary that all faithful throughout Italy were welcome to join via streaming. The general audiences were suspended. Well, they weren't suspended aside from the summer break, but they were held privately in the Pope's private library with his collaborators, all socially distant. And the Angeluses were done with the Pope alone in his private library, all via streaming, but faithful could not be present. And ultimately, it's a very challenging moment, because even though now many can go back to Mass, even though only half the capacity of people can be accommodated. But even before, it's not that the churches in Italy generally were full. But some priests are acknowledging that some people have kind of gotten comfortable to being at home, or maybe they've lost the habit of going to church. So they notice that some people are not coming back, and we will have to see what that ultimately means. Certainly, it was a time where this isolation led many people to acknowledge their fragility and turn to the faith or question their faith or try to live the suffering through as an act of faith, as an act of sacrifice.
Mm-hmm. And this the situation caused that we had these limitations. What do you think about these restrictions? How Catholics can perceive these restrictions? How important are they?
Certainly, there's been a lot of debate on this question because everyone, Catholics included, want that all faithful and all people are safe and that there are less people dying, less people in intensive care. But it's also true that many Catholics certainly see their faith and going to Mass and receiving the sacraments as being essential, and therefore, if done prudently, something that should be able to happen without significant risks, no more risky than going into the supermarket, which was an essential service, or walking into a pharmacy, which also constituted an essential service. So while certainly there is this interest in following the rules and the suggestions of authorities.
And what Catholics can learn from this period, like maybe being close to each other or something else, or?
Yes, well, certainly this period of time created sort of a looking inside oneself to their own faith and realizing whether or not they felt at this time of difficulty that they felt closer to God, or they felt that they in some way could have cultivated their personal faith relationship better on a personal level. But without that experience of community, that also was a certain test, because the church, especially in these summer months even, there's so many activities that are so important for faithful that are all suspended or done differently depending around the world, the situation of the virus in the given country. And we see here in the Vatican that Pope Francis has no agenda per se. Everything has more or less been canceled or pushed back for the following years. So, for instance, any of the papal trips that were planned for 2020 have been pushed back indefinitely, depending on how the situation evolves, or if there's a second wave. We will have to see what happens. And even various other initiatives of the church that are very important that would have been planned, for instance, Communion and Liberation. They have this meeting of Rimini, which brings together various important personalities, and that normally takes place in August. That will be done virtually. Sant'Egidio normally has an event in their annual event in September, and that likely will be done virtually. In terms of the World Meeting of Families and the World Youth Day, which were scheduled in 2021 and 2022, both the major international events have been pushed back by a year. The Eucharistic Congress in Hungary has been pushed back by a year. We don't know whether or not the Pope will be able to travel in 2021, but obviously the Vatican is taking a very prudent approach because they don't want to put anyone's lives at risk by creating crowds. But at the same time, it's a delicate balance as they work toward the proper approach to keep faithful praying and spiritually interested and present at a time where faith is being tested And in this age of globalization, it's very hard to be optimistic. One can always have faith, but to be optimistic as to when this pandemic will be done. The Pope had said Italy has finished its acute phase. There could be second waves, but there are other countries that have not experienced the acute phase yet or are experiencing it. And as those countries start to visit each other, have contact with each other in a physical sense, it will be almost inevitable that there are not more cases, because even if here in Italy the deaths are down, those in intensive care are fewer, there are still more cases of contagion, and this will pose further issues and make it harder to start back up again. But
do you think that it a good decision to postpone the World of Wheat meeting planned before for 2022? That the decision has been already taken. Maybe the Pope could even see in 1 year if it's necessary, or was it good to do it already?
I think at this point, there was also the economic aspect to consider. So even if the health emergency has finished or gotten better by that time, the economic fallout internationally will have been so massive that the church is also aware of how many people are struggling financially at this time. And I think they need to consider the practical elements as to how people for these events that involve traveling internationally and flights and hotels, whether or not that will be feasible. For instance, if all Romans had to go to an event in Rome, that would be one thing. But if you are speaking about a world where certain countries certainly do not have the virus under control, and we don't know to what extent that will change and when, then people from those countries will not be able to participate. They will not necessarily be allowed by hotels or at people's homes to stay, being asked, you need to quarantine, or even being looked at with a stigma. So I think these are some of the other elements that the church is considering beyond and this is why looking at a farther ahead timeline from their point of view seems more reasonable.
Mm-hmm. Our president, new re-elected president Andrzej Duda, has decided for his first visit abroad, he decided to go to Italy and to the Holy See. And what do you think if it's how important could be this meeting for both our countries, for Poland, for Italy, and the Holy See? Because he's going to meet also the Pope Francis.
Yes, the visit of the president of Poland to Pope Francis is always a very significant moment. Often the Pope's encounters with presidents or prime ministers very rarely are more than an hour, normally between a half hour and an hour. But it's certainly important, even if the Polish president has already met Pope Francis in the past, to continue this dialogue. And we know that Pope Francis had a beautiful visit to Poland for the World Youth Day in Krakow a few years ago. Sometimes the press stereotypes countries or the Pope. It's an opportunity to have authentic dialogue among two important individuals. And even if occasionally the press tries to reduce the themes of interest of Poland or of Pope Francis to seem as though in some way they are not completely in agreement, they focus on the topic of migrants. But for informed people, we also know the great welcome that Poland has given for many Ukrainian immigrants as well. So ultimately, this caricature by the press is often does not correspond to reality. And the fact that there will be this important audience between the president and Pope Francis is really an important opportunity for them to have this dialogue, to deepen this dialogue, and an opportunity for them to collaborate even further in the future.
Mm-hmm. What could this meeting bring to our countries?
This meeting between Pope Francis and the President of Poland can definitely contribute to a renewed dialogue between the European country that is arguably the most Catholic country throughout all of Europe, and the fact that this year also marks the 100-year anniversary of the birth of Pope Francis's predecessor, John Paul II, also marks an important opportunity to discuss that event and how it has been affected also in the light of the COVID-19 crisis, because there would have been specific plans in Rome during 2020, and given the pandemic, things had to change. So an opportunity to work together and to continue to foster an important diplomatic relationship, and then just have good, important contact between the two important individuals of the head of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis, and the President of Poland.
Portal TVP Info. Wiesz więcej.